So there I was, Jake Martinez, the only human in a classroom full of aliens who looked like they'd stepped out of a fever dream, designed by someone who'd never seen Earth biology. And let me tell you, being the token Deathworlder at Galactic University comes with its own special brand of entertainment. Professor Cullix stood at the front of the room, all 8 of his tentacles gesticulating wildly, as he explained our latest assignment. He looked like an octopus that had gone through a radioactive car wash and somehow gained the ability to speak in a voice that sounded like helium mixed with static electricity. Class, today we begin our practical survival engineering project, Cullix announced, his translator doing its best to make his garbled speech sound professorial. You must design a simple survival shelter using only materials naturally available on your homeworld. Around me, my classmates perked up with the kind of enthusiasm you'd expect from beings whose biggest survival challenge was probably choosing which climate-controlled dome to live in. There was Vex, who looked like a walking crystal formation with trust issues. Bloom, a plant person who probably photosynthesized their lunch, and Chip, whose species had apparently evolved from living computer chips because the universe has a sense of humor. Remember, Professor Cullix continued, this exercise is about resourcefulness and adaptation. Show me how your species would survive in the wild using primitive methods. Primitive methods. Right. Because when you're from a species that figured out fire while your ancestors were still trying to evolve opposable thumbs, everything looks primitive. I caught Vex shooting me one of those looks. You know the kind, the same look you'd give a particularly slow pet that somehow learned to walk upright. The other students were doing their best not to stare, but let's be honest. When you're the only human in a room full of beings who think Earth is basically hell's vacation resort, you tend to draw attention. See, here's the thing about being a Deathworlder. Everyone knows your planet is trying to kill you 24/7, but they figure that just makes you tough, like a really persistent weed. What they don't realize is that surviving on a planet that's actively hostile to life tends to make you creative in ways that don't immediately register on their nice, safe, predictable worlds. You have 1 week, Cullix announced. I expect detailed schematics, material analysis, and a working prototype. This assignment counts for 30% of your final grade. As the class started to disperse, chattering excitedly about their grand designs, I just sat there grinning. Because while they were planning to build the galactic equivalent of luxury condos, I was about to show them what happens when you take a species that learned to survive ice ages, predators, natural disasters, and a planet that changes its mind about being habitable every few thousand years, and ask them to build a simple shelter. This was going to be fun. Over the next few days, I got to watch my classmates throw themselves into this project with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for species that had never experienced actual hardship. And boy did they have some ideas. Vex, our resident crystal person, had designed what could only be described as a geometric fever dream. Picture a house made entirely of glowing crystals that somehow channeled ambient energy from 3 different dimensions to maintain perfect temperature control. The blueprints looked like someone had asked a mathematician to design a disco ball with delusions of grandeur. The resonance matrices will automatically adjust to any environmental fluctuation, Vex explained to anyone who'd listen, which was pretty much everyone except me. It's practically foolproof. Practically foolproof, assuming your planet doesn't have weather, earthquakes, or anything more challenging than a light breeze. Bloom, meanwhile, had gone full mad scientist with biology. Their shelter was less of a structure and more of a pet that happened to be house-shaped. They'd engineered some kind of living tree thing that would supposedly grow into the perfect shelter within hours, complete with climate control, water filtration, and what I swear was a built-in entertainment system. The biomatrix responds to genetic markers, Bloom said, stroking their creation like it might purr. It literally grows around you, adapting to your specific biological needs. Right, because nothing could possibly go wrong with a house that has its own DNA and opinions about interior decorating. But Chip took the cake for sheer over-engineering. Their design looked like someone had crossed a space station with a Rubik's Cube and then taught it to do quantum physics. The thing existed in multiple dimensional phases simultaneously, which apparently made it completely impervious to conventional threats. Phase-shifted matter cannot be affected by standard environmental factors, Chip buzzed in that electronic voice that always sounded like a computer having an existential crisis. It exists in a quantum superposition until observation collapses the wave function into optimal configuration. Professor Krulix was practically glowing with pride as he reviewed each design. 8 tentacles writhing with what I assumed was academic excitement, he praised the innovative applications of advanced technology and creative solutions to survival challenges. Meanwhile, I was sitting in the back row, sketching what looked like something a caveman might build after a particularly uninspired day. Sticks, leaves, maybe some rocks if I was feeling fancy. The other students had started shooting me looks that ranged from pity to barely contained amusement. I caught Vex whispering to Bloom about primitive species and limited technological advancement. Chip just kept making that electronic clicking sound that I'd learned was their version of laughing. Jake, Professor Krulix called out, would you like to share your progress with the class? I looked up from my decidedly low-tech doodles. Oh, I'm good, Professor. Still working out some of the finer details. The finer details being exactly how much I was going to enjoy watching their faces when they realized their over-engineered marvels wouldn't last 5 minutes in a light drizzle on Earth. Presentation day arrived with all the pomp and circumstance you'd expect from a bunch of aliens who thought they'd just revolutionized survival technology. The classroom had been converted into a mini expo, with each student's creation displayed like we were at some kind of intergalactic science fair. Vex's crystal palace sat there humming with dimensional energy, casting rainbow patterns across the ceiling. Bloom's bioshelter had grown into something that looked like a cross between a treehouse and an organic spaceship, complete with what I swear were little flower windows. And Chip's quantum whatever it was kept flickering in and out of existence, which was apparently a feature, not a bug. Then there was my contribution sitting in the corner like the ugly stepchild at a beauty pageant. A basic lean-to made of branches, leaves, and what looked suspiciously like camping knowledge from Earth's Boy Scout handbook. It was so simple it was almost insulting. Professor Kulik started the presentations with his usual enthusiasm, tentacles practically vibrating as each student explained their masterpiece. The class oohed and asked at the appropriate moments, asking technical questions about energy matrices and biocompatibility factors that went completely over my head. Fascinating applications of quantum mechanics, Kulik gushed after Chip's presentation. The theoretical implications alone could revolutionize emergency shelter technology. Finally, inevitably, all eyes turned to me and my sad little pile of sticks. Jake, Professor Kulik said, and I could hear him trying really hard to sound encouraging. Please show us your design. I stood up, walked over to my lean-to, and gestured at it with all the pride of someone presenting a mud pie to a 5-star restaurant critic. This is it. The silence that followed was the kind you usually hear right before someone starts laughing or crying. I wasn't sure which way this was going to go. Vex's crystalline features somehow managed to convey disappointment. That's it. Yep, I said, patting one of the support branches. Simple, effective, uses only materials you can find lying around pretty much anywhere. Bloom made a sound that I think was supposed to be sympathetic. It's very rustic. I was going for functional, I replied. Chip's electronic voice buzzed with what sounded like confusion. But where are the environmental controls? The structural integrity fields? The quantum stabilizers? Don't need them. Professor Kulik cleared his throat, which is a weird sound when you don't technically have a throat. Jake, while I appreciate the minimalist approach, perhaps you could explain how this design addresses the various survival challenges one might encounter. The room was so quiet I could hear Vex's crystals humming and Bloom's shelter photosynthesizing. Everyone was looking at me with that mixture of pity and second-hand embarrassment you get when watching someone fail spectacularly in public. I grinned. Mind if I demonstrate why this works? Professor Kulik's tentacles did that nervous wiggling thing they did when he wasn't sure if he was about to witness genius or disaster. Well, I suppose a practical demonstration would be educational. Great, I said, pulling out what looked like a standard environmental simulator that every classroom had. Let me just set up some basic Earth conditions and show you how this baby performs. I started punching in numbers, and I could see my classmates settling in for what they clearly expected to be a spectacular failure. Vex was already making that crystalline chiming sound that passed for snickering in their species. So, Earth, I began conversationally, like I was discussing the weather instead of programming a torture chamber. Lovely little planet, bit of a fixer-upper, but it has character. Let's start with something simple. How about a nice spring day? I entered the parameters: temperature 68 degrees Fahrenheit, humidity 40%, wind speed 15 miles per hour with gusts up to 30. This seems reasonable, Bloom commented, their leaves rustling with what I assumed was relief. Oh, this is just the warm-up, I said cheerfully. See, the thing about Earth is that our weather has personality. It likes to change its mind. A lot. Sometimes violently. I cranked the wind up to 50 miles per hour and added some rain. Not a gentle sprinkle, mind you, but the kind of driving rain that feels like nature is personally offended by your existence. The simulator kicked in, and suddenly the classroom was filled with howling wind and sheets of water. Vex's crystal palace immediately started resonating at frequencies that sounded like a dying whale. The energy matrices couldn't compensate for the chaotic wind patterns, and the whole structure began to vibrate apart. The dimensional harmonics are destabilizing. Vex shouted over the storm, their voice cracking with panic. Meanwhile, my little lean-to just sat there, shedding water like it was born to do it. The angled roof sent the rain streaming away, the interwoven branches flexed with the wind instead of fighting it, and the whole thing stayed exactly where I'd put it. Interesting, I mused, turning up the intensity. But you know, spring storms can be unpredictable. Sometimes you get hail. I added ice pellets, the size of marbles, to the mix. Bloom's bioshelter immediately started screaming. And I mean literally screaming, because apparently they'd programmed it with pain receptors, which seemed like a design flaw in hindsight. The organic walls began to bruise and tear under the impact. Make it stop, Bloom wailed. It's suffering. It's hail, I replied. This is actually pretty mild for Earth. I once saw a storm drop ice chunks the size of golf balls. Totaled about 1,000 cars in 10 minutes. Chip's quantum shelter was having an existential crisis. The phase shifts couldn't keep up with the rapid environmental changes, and it kept flickering between dimensions like a strobe light having a seizure. The quantum matrices cannot maintain coherence under these chaotic conditions. Chip buzzed frantically. Yeah, quantum physics doesn't really care about your engineering degree when a storm front moves through, I said, watching my lean-to continue to perform exactly as advertised. But hey, this is just spring weather. Want to see what summer's like? I didn't wait for an answer. The temperature shot up to 95 degrees with humidity at 80%. The kind of heat that makes you question your life choices and wonder if moving to Antarctica might be a reasonable career change. Vex's crystals started overheating and cracking. Bloom's bioshelter began wilting like a forgotten houseplant. Chip's quantum whatever it was couldn't maintain phase coherence in the thermal chaos. How do you survive in these conditions? Professor Kulix asked, his tentacles drooping with what I could only assume was horror. Oh, this is nothing, I laughed. Wait until I show you winter, or tornado season. Or that time the Yellowstone supervolcano decided to clear its throat and blocked out the sun for a few years. The room went dead silent except for the sound of alien technology failing spectacularly. Even the environmental simulator seemed to pause, as if it was processing the implications of what I'd just said. Your planet has supervolcanoes, Bloom whispered. Several, I replied cheerfully. Plus earthquakes, hurricanes, tsunamis, ice ages, meteor impacts. And that's just the natural disasters. Don't get me started on the wildlife. I looked around at their horrified faces and grinned. But hey, that's why we build our shelters, to handle a little variety in the weather forecast. Professor Kulix's tentacles had gone completely still, which in his species was the equivalent of a human's jaw hitting the floor. Jake, he said slowly, perhaps you could elaborate on this variety. Oh, absolutely, I said, cracking my knuckles like I was about to give a TED talk on planetary masochism. See, the thing is, my little lean-to here isn't just designed for one type of weather, it's designed for all types of weather. Because on Earth you never know what you're going to get. I started adjusting the environmental controls again. Let's say you're camping in the Rocky Mountains. Beautiful place, really. Except in the morning it's 30 degrees, by afternoon it's 85, and by evening there's a thunderstorm with lightning that could power a small city. The simulator obliged, cycling through the temperature changes in fast forward. Vex's crystal structure couldn't handle the thermal expansion and contraction. TCs started falling off like expensive, glowing confetti. Bloom's bioshelter went into some kind of biological shock from the rapid changes, its leaves turning colors that probably weren't supposed to exist in nature. The structural integrity is completely compromised. Chip wailed as their quantum shelter flickered faster than a broken hologram. Right. Which is why you design for adaptability, I said, patting my lean-to, which was adjusting to each condition like it was barely an inconvenience. But that's just mountain weather. Let's try desert. I cranked the heat up to 120 degrees Fahrenheit with zero humidity and sandstorm force winds. The kind of conditions where the air itself becomes your enemy and every breath feels like inhaling a hairdryer filled with disappointment. This is impossible. Vex's voice was getting higher, which made the crystals ring like broken bells. No organic life could survive these extremes. Funny thing about that, I said, watching their shelters disintegrate in real time. Humans have been living in deserts for thousands of years. The Sahara, the Gobi, Death Valley, which, by the way, is literally named Death Valley, and people still vacation there. You vacation in places named after death? Bloom asked weakly. We also have a place called Hell's Kitchen that serves excellent pizza, I replied. But let's try Arctic conditions, shall we? The temperature plummeted to -40 degrees with winds that would make a polar bear reconsider its life choices. Now all three alien shelters were basically expensive piles of frozen wreckage, while my lean-to just hunkered down and did its job. The energy requirements to maintain habitability in these conditions would be astronomical. Chip buzzed, their electronic voice distorting from the cold. Or I said, you could just build smart instead of building complicated. See, this design works because it doesn't fight the environment. It works with it. Rain rolls off, wind flows around it, snow provides extra insulation. It's not trying to create a perfect bubble of comfort. It's trying to keep you alive while the planet throws its tantrum. Professor Kulik was taking notes frantically, his tentacles moving so fast they were practically a blur. But surely there must be limits to what this design can handle. Well, let's find out, I said with the kind of grin that probably should have come with a warning label. How about we simulate earthquake conditions? Say, a nice 6.5 on the Richter scale. The room started shaking like a paint mixer on steroids. Anything that was left of the alien shelters either fell over or vibrated into component atoms. My lean-to swayed with the motion, flexible enough to bend without breaking, anchored but not rigid. Earthquake, several voices said at once. Oh yeah, the ground moves sometimes. California gets a few hundred small ones every year. It's like the planet's way of stretching. Then there are the big ones that rearrange the furniture and make you really appreciate earthquake-resistant architecture. I wasn't done. Hurricane force winds, Category 5, winds up to 200 miles per hour. That's when the weather gets spicy and trees start flying around like nature's throwing a temper tantrum. The simulator roared to life with winds that would make a jet engine sound like a whisper. At this point, I was pretty sure the alien shelters had transcended physical matter and become abstract concepts of failure. Volcanic activity, let's go with pyroclastic flow, about 800 degrees Celsius, moving at 60 miles per hour. That's what happens when a mountain gets really angry. Your mountains get angry? Vex asked in a voice that had moved beyond horror into some kind of existential despair. Our mountains explode, I corrected. Sometimes for months at a time. Pompeii was just having a bad day compared to some of the really impressive eruptions. I looked around the room at my classmates, who were all staring at me like I'd just told them I commuted to work through the ninth circle of hell every morning. And the beautiful thing about this design, I continued, gesturing at my still intact lean-to, is that it works in all of these conditions. Not perfectly, mind you. You might be uncomfortable. You might be scared. You might question your life choices. But you'll be alive, which on Earth is sometimes the best you can hope for. How? Professor Kulik asked in a voice barely above a whisper. How does your species survive on such a planet? I shrugged. We adapt. We build things that work when everything else fails. We make tools out of rocks and sticks, and somehow end up conquering a planet that spends every waking moment trying to kill us. And then we call it home and get nostalgic about it when we're away too long. The room was dead silent except for the gentle hum of my environmental simulator winding down. Oh, I added casually, and this is just basic survival shelter. Wait until you see what we build when we're actually trying to impress someone. The silence that followed was the kind you usually hear in the moments before someone either has a breakthrough or a complete psychological breakdown. Professor Kulik was the first to recover, though recover might be a generous term for what looked like academic shell shock. Jake, he said, his tentacles trembling slightly, I believe I owe you an apology, and possibly my entire species owes your species a formal letter of condolence for having to exist on such a planet. Nah, we're good, I said, dismantling my lean-to with the casual efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Earth keeps things interesting. Sure, the weather's trying to kill you, the ground might swallow you up, and don't get me started on the wildlife situation. But it builds character. Vex had gone completely quiet, their crystalline form flickering dimly like a dying light bulb. Finally, they managed to speak. Jake, when you said this was a simple survival shelter, what exactly do you mean by simple? I paused in my packing, giving them the kind of look you'd give someone who just asked why water is wet. I mean, this is literally what we teach 12-year-old children when they go camping. Basic Boy Scout stuff. Wilderness Survival 101. 12-year-old children, Bloom repeated slowly, their voice hollow with the kind of existential dread usually reserved for philosophical discussions about the heat death of the universe. Yep, kids go out into the woods for fun, build these with pocket knives and whatever they can scavenge, sleep in them overnight, then hike back home in the morning talking about what a great time they had. We call it character building. Chip's electronic voice had dropped to barely a whisper. You send your offspring into environments that would kill most galactic species, for recreation. Well, supervised recreation, I clarified. Usually. Sometimes they just wander off on their own. Kids are surprisingly resilient when you're not constantly bubble wrapping them. Professor Kulik had been scribbling notes frantically throughout this entire conversation, but now he stopped and looked up at me with something that might have been awe mixed with terror. Jake, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Shoot. This assignment was worth 30% of your final grade. You could have simply built something impressive to earn points. Instead, you chose to demonstrate why everyone else's designs were fundamentally flawed. Why? I finished packing up my sticks and leaves, shouldering my backpack with a grin. Because you asked us to design a survival shelter using materials from our homeworld. Everyone else designed luxury housing with delusions of ruggedness. I built something that would actually keep me alive if I got dropped in the middle of nowhere with nothing but what I could carry. But surely, Vex interjected desperately, there must be some environments on Earth that are pleasant. Oh, absolutely, I said cheerfully. We have beaches, meadows, forests, mountains, beautiful places where you can relax and enjoy nature. Of course, the beaches have rip currents and sharks, the meadows have bears and poisonous plants, the forests have everything from venomous snakes to falling trees, and the mountains have avalanches, rock slides and altitude sickness. But the views are spectacular. How? Bloom asked with the tone of someone questioning the fundamental nature of reality. How did your species ever develop space travel when your planet is actively trying to prevent you from surviving long enough to invent fire? Same way we developed everything else, I replied. By being too stubborn to die and too curious to give up. We looked at a planet that throws every conceivable disaster at us and said, you know what, this isn't challenging enough. Let's see what's out there in the void of space where there's no air, no heat, and radiation that'll cook you faster than a microwave burrito. Professor Kulik set down his stylus and looked at me with something approaching reverence. Jake, I'm changing your grade. Oh, you're getting full marks, not just for this assignment, but I'm recommending you for advanced placement in extreme environment engineering. Clearly we have much to learn from human survival techniques. I shrugged. Cool, does this mean I can skip the final exam? Jake, he said seriously, after today, I'm not sure our final exam would be challenging enough for someone who considers natural disasters a normal part of childhood development. As I headed for the door, I heard Vex whisper to Bloom. Do you think there are more of them out there? I hope not, Bloom whispered back. One species that treats hell as a vacation destination is probably enough for the galaxy. I paused at the doorway, and looked back with the kind of smile that probably should have come with a warning label. By the way, if anyone's interested, I'm organizing a camping trip to Earth next semester. We'll be hiking through Yellowstone, which sits on top of that supervolcano I mentioned. It's completely safe as long as it doesn't decide to erupt, which statistically probably won't happen while we're there. Probably, several voices asked in unison. Hey, life's an adventure, I said, walking out into the hallway. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? Behind me, I heard the sound of several alien species simultaneously reconsidering their life choices, and possibly their entire philosophical understanding of what constituted reasonable risk assessment. Just another day at Galactic University, where apparently being the only human meant being the guy who accidentally terrifies everyone just by explaining where he's from. I couldn't wait to see their faces when they found out about Australian wildlife.